Pray. Lord, as we listen to your word, may we be prepared to be faithful to the call to stand for you, to be guided by your Spirit. Amen. Now, most of you would know, or perhaps you don't, that there are two books in the Bible that were written about faithful women. One of the books is Ruth, and that tells the story of a foreigner who gave up her own life to support her mother-in-law Naomi. And we know that she became the great, ever so great grandmother of Jesus. And then the other book is the story of Esther, a Jewish girl who was in exile in Persia. I actually love the story of Esther. It has all the intrigue of a mystery story. I've got this amazing video here called One Night with the King, which is a sort of Hollywood version of the story of Esther. So if anybody feels they'd like to borrow it, I've got it here, we may borrow it. It's a good watch, but it's a bit Hollywood, as they say in classics. So, the reading today has only given us a really small part of the story of Esther. And because I like the story of Esther so much, I thought it might be important for us to know the whole story. And so I decided that I would tell you the story. So sit back, relax, as we listen to the story of Esther. And so, we remember from the reading that Esther, we had to step out in faith to do a few things that were really important. So, the story begins when the king of Persia, his name was actually Xerxes, even though he had a different name in the Bible, that's his Hebrew version. So, it starts with the king having 2 days of amazing feasting. And he had this amazing feast. Would you believe it lasted 187 days? Can you imagine feasting for 187 days? That's a big feast. And all of that was so that he could show off just how fantastic he is, how fabulous his rule was, and what a marvellous kingdom he had, and all to do with greatness and splendour. And on the last day of the feast, he was just a little bit drunk, as you can imagine after partying for 187 days, and he decided that it would be really, really important for his wife, who was beautiful beyond belief. Her name was Vashti, Queen Vashti, and he asked her to appear at the party so that he could show off her beauty. She refused. Oops, very, very silly to refuse a king. So all of a sudden, of course, we find that the king goes into a drunken rage. And you're going to hear about that quite a bit. He has a few drunken rages in the story. And he deposes Vashti. And then he makes this really silly decree that says all wives, that all the Persian men should be the masters of their own homes. And then the king holds a beauty pageant in order to find a new queen. And right when the story feels like a bad soap opera, we're introduced to Esther and Mordecai. Esther hides her Jewish identity and she poses as a Persian, and she wins the beauty pageant. The king is also obsessed with Esther that he elevates her to be the new queen of Persia. And after this, Mordecai, who happens to be Esther's uncle, and Mordecai was the one who looked after Esther because she was an orphan, and he looked after her and brought her up. So, Mordecai just happens to overhear 2 guards were plotting to kill the king. And so he goes and tells Esther, who then tells the king. And Mordecai gets the credit for saving the king's life. And all of these remarkable events, you might notice if you ever read the book of Esther, God is not actually mentioned by names. God is inferred in all of them, but God is not mentioned by name. And you have to ask yourself, well, what on earth is God up to? And we begin to find out in the next part of the story. I'm very enjoying the story because I just love the story. So, we're introduced to a guy called Haman, who's not a Persian, but he's an Agagite, a descendant of the ancient Canaanites. And the king elevates Haman to the highest position in the kingdom and demands that all kneel before him. But of course, when Mordecai sees Haman, he refuses to kneel, and Haman is filled with rage. And when Haman finds out that Mordecai is Jewish, he successfully persuades the king to enact a decree to destroy all Jews. And they decide the date of this horrific day in a most outrageous way. They actually throw a dice. And Haman rolls the ancient dice, which is B-U-R in Hebrew. And the decree is set 11 months later, on the 13th of Adar. All the Jews will be executed. And Haman and the king throw yet another party to celebrate the decree. After this, the story starts to focus on Esther and Mordecai, who are now the only hope for the Jewish people. And they plan for Esther to reveal her Jewish identity to the king and ask that he reverse the decree. But, as there always is, there was a huge risk involved, because approaching the king without the king asking you to come means that you could be killed. It means that you could be executed. At the crucial moment in the story, Mordecai says to Esther that if she remains silent, perhaps the deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. And then he wanders aloud. Who knows? Maybe you became queen for this very moment. And Esther responds with bravery and says, if I perish, I perish. And so she decides to approach the king. And we then see an ironic reversal of all Haman's evil plans. So Esther hosts the king and Haman the banquet, where she makes a very special request that they both come to an even more exclusive banquet the next day. And Haman leaves the feast feeling a little drunk, and very happy with himself. And he sees Mordecai in the street. And when Mordecai doesn't bow down to him, Haman fuses with anger and orders the tall gallows be built so that Mordecai can be hanged the next morning. Now it seems that things can't get any worse for the Jews or for Mordecai, for all of a sudden the story pivots. You see, that night the king can't sleep, and so he has the Royal Chronicles read to him, and it just so happens that he hears about how Mordecai saved the king's life from the plot of the guards. The king had totally forgotten about it all. And so in the morning, as Haman enters to request Mordecai's execution, this is part of the story that I know, to organise the execution. The king asked Haman, "How would you treat a person who is honoured by the king?" And Haman thinks, "Oh, it must be me." And he says, "Oh, dress them in the finest of clothing and the best robes and parade them round the streets on one of your best horses." So the king orders Haman to honour Mordecai publicly for saving his life. Haman then has to lead Mordecai about the city on a royal horse. And this reversal forms a turning point in the story, beginning with Haman's downfall and ending with Mordecai's rise to power. The next day, we know this ability, the next day, Esther hosts the second banquet. And the king and Haman arrive, and Esther informs the king of her Jewish identity. Then she reveals that Haman's decree is a ploy to murder Mordecai, the man who saved the king's life. And after taking in quite a lot of wine and Esther's news, the king goes into yet another drunken rage, and he orders that Haman be hung on the gallows that he made for Mordecai. But Haman's execution doesn't solve the problem of the decree to kill the Jews. So the focus turned back to Mordecai and Esther as they plan to reverse the decree. When they discover that the king's decree cannot be changed, like when the king back then made a decree, it was like sitting concrete, and there was no way it could be changed. So Mordecai is commissioned to issue a counter-decree. And on the day when all the Jewish people were to be killed, the Jewish people were now able to defend themselves and destroy anyone who plotted against them. And after this, Mordecai, Esther, and the Jewish people everywhere hold banquets and feasts to celebrate the new decree. The most amazing thing of all is that Mordecai is elevated to a seat beside the king. So I wonder, you saw that little turn of events happen today. Eventually, the decreed day comes and the Jews triumph over their enemies. First, they destroy Haman's family along with any other Persian officials who would join in Haman's plot. And the next day, the Jewish people are allowed to destroy anyone who plotted against them. And this is followed by great joy and celebration because the Jewish people had been rescued from annihilation. The story then tells how Esther and Mordecai established another decree to remember this day in a special celebration. This great reversal and rescue will be memorialised by an annual 2-day feast called Purim, named after Haman's faithful dice. And the book concludes with a short epilogue. Mordecai is elevated to second in command in the kingdom, and we're told of his royal greatness and splendour as the Jews thrive in exile. Isn't that an amazing story? Any wonder they made a movie about it. You know, there are times in our lives when the most important thing we can do is to be true to ourselves and to our divine destiny. Often, like Esther, that destiny is not something we've sought or desired. Just so often, God plans for us, requires much more of us than we thought we had to give. Yet God's grace makes it possible for us to be available at just the right time to accomplish God's purpose. Sometimes we consider ourselves handicapped by age, or too young or too old, or handicapped by gender or race or physical ability. Our internal battles can distract us from the path that God has set before us. But we are given the strength, if we're willing, to step out in faith and follow God's direction. Consider Esther. I mean, just think about it. She was a queen. She was very comfortable, very well looked after. She had fine clothes, lots of food to eat. She was in a pretty good spot. She didn't have to do anything. She could have just kept on going, but no. She decided that she would step out in faith because she was needed by God to set in place a way forward for the Jewish captives to survive. And by stepping out in answer to the call to help meant that she may have lost her own life. But she didn't have to lose her life. The love she had for her people and their preservation caused her to take that risk. God did not require for her to give up her life, but she did have to give of herself. And that's almost the essence of the story. Esther had to give of herself. She had to overcome fear for her life in order to save the Jewish nation in Persia. As Christians in the 21st century, our task is to stay open to God's call. No matter how daunting the task might appear before we begin, we know by faith that it is God who will give us the strength and the power, because Jesus was true to his divine destiny. We have both life and we also have faith. The Spirit of Christ within empowers us to fulfill our destinies in just such time as this. So, can I encourage you to be open to the Holy Spirit? You just never know when God might call you out of your comfort zone to be God's hands, feet, and heart in the world, because you may have been created for such a time as this. Amen.